welcome Brother Ashra Kwesi to Abundance Child Live for the second time.
Greetings. Honored to be on your show, my sister.
Yes, give thanks.
And holler out to Brother King Simon. It's honored to be at his community again, keeping our story alive. Without him, we wouldn't be able to do this.
So,
thank you.
Peace.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, we're all here. We're all here.
Okay.
No more difficulties today. We're done with that.
Well, I'm honored to come back to another community. I coined the term that Bobby Wright, who wrote the Psychopathic Racial Personality, he said, we've got to start to have communiversities that we control in educating our people in the community. And we can't feel that we're being educated in the European classroom. That's the psychological gas chamber, which has torn our story apart. So I'm equally honored to be on this program dealing with African spirituality, the origin of the Bible, the origin of the good book. So I know that's a lot of eyebrow raising when one hears the African origin of the Bible or anything African. Keep in mind that when we take in consideration our Ma'afa, meaning that we were kidnapped from the African continent and brought over here, everything that we have been taught in the Western world has come from the Western world point of view. And it's time for us now to go through that final emancipation, and that is the emancipation of our mind. But above all, we cannot be incarcerated, through religions. And it's through the religions, whether it's Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, or any other religion, that we have not been able to tell our story. And many of us have believed a lot of these stories that we see in the biblical account and have no idea that these things are corruptions of ancient African spirituality that was told for countless thousands of years before these Western versions of religions were even in existence. When we deal with African people's story of the African Nile Valley, we're not dealing with mystical characters or things that used to be or things of this nature. As you mentioned in the bio there, 31 years of my life, again, giving credit to my teacher, Dr. Yusuf Nyaka, and 14 years doing field research with him. And when I first heard him back in the early 70s, and I asked Dr. Ben after his lecture, can you prove this? He said, young man, not only can I prove it, but I can take you back and show you. But above all, we need people like you to do the field research. So primarily that has been my work over the years, going to the sites, to these places, documenting it, and feeling the pain coming in that here you have real places, not mystical places, not religious places that they've told us to believe in, but real places where they have corrupted many of the spiritual stories of African people. As you mentioned in the creation story, African people have the earliest known creation stories. In fact, we had many creation stories in many spiritual centers, whether we're dealing with the spiritual center of what is known as Waset in Upper Kemet, where you still have the largest temple on the planet Earth called Ipitosut. Now, I know the listening audience, some who may hear this, may not even know these names, but these are real places that exist. And how about the creation story of Menefer? Here you have the creation story that the Greeks called Memphis. Here you have the creation story where the spiritual deity, Ptah, is bringing into existence and creating the universe, saying, let there be light. We can see how this was plagiarized. The creation story we see in Genesis, which is a Greek word that means the beginning, that is not the beginning, but that is whether we're looking at a Hebrew beginning, that's many, many thousands of years later after the creation story of the Memphite theology story. Now, through my travels, I have gone to many museums of the world, and one of the museums that every time when I go over to England to lecture, I always stop in the Metropolitan Museum. And there are thousands of people who are walking around in there visiting the pieces that they stole up out of Africa, visiting the colossals, but there's one major piece out of all the pieces. There's a stone called the Memphite theology stone. Why is that stone important? That stone is important because here on that stone is telling of Ptah creating the universe. That stone was stolen from Africa by the British, and now it's in the British Museum, but yet they are not revealing the fact this is where they got their concept of the creation story of Genesis in the Bible, from this Memphite theology story. Now, we first hear about this stone by an African Kushite king named Shabaka. He found the stone. It was already owed to him. But when we look at the world's first language called the Medu Neter, that the Greeks call the hieroglyphics, this long before Hebrew, long before Aramaic, long before Arabic, here we see in the translation of that stone, you can see how the idea of let there be light, creating the heavens and the earth, that was taken from African people. African people created these spiritual stories. We were not just standing around waiting for Europeans, waiting for Arabs, and waiting for other people. African people, we created many stories up and down the Nile. And one of the major parts of that creation story, in the Menthite theology story, that was corrupted by the Western world, is in the creation of man and woman. In the African creation story, in the Zeptepi, or that first time, as it's called in ancient Kemet, here we see the first man and woman were created. They were created simultaneously. There was no misogyny in the African creation story, meaning that there was no rib taken from the first man that our ancestors called a Sar to make a Set. Here are the patriarchs or the invaders that came from the north who destroyed the spiritual goddess that our ancestors called Netert, destroyed that spiritual system because of their misogyny. So we got the corruption now of the creation story, and many people believe this Adam and Eve story that they're trying to make Adam and Steve today. Here, when we understand the creation story, we looked at it in the spirit of Ma'at. What is Ma'at? Ma'at represents spiritual balance. And in that spiritual balance, man and woman were created simultaneously. There was not a story that our ancestors, you could not eat from the tree of good and evil. That story did not exist. But there is a story that a Sar and a Set ate from the tree of divine life and wisdom that was corrupted to the tree of good and evil. And of course, when we know that when the story is told to us that when Eve ate from the tree, this is the reason for the world's sins. This is also to let her know that her menstrual cycle is to remind her that she ate of the tree of good and evil and then seduced Adam to eat from the fruit as well. This is a corruption as well as a misogynistic creation story, and many people believe this story to this very day. We've got to go back and start to study the African spiritual stories of the Nile Valley. As I said before, many of us know about these stories that we get, and many of us, our divinity have been destroyed, meaning our divine representation were destroyed because all the imagery and representation of these stories are in European images in the first place. When you go look at the Sistine Chapel and all these things, like when I was in England during the presentation, and I showed how where it says, let us make man in our own image. Well, I've been questioning that us for a long time, but the fact that Michelangelo painted the God is white and Adam is white, well, the preacher ran out when I'm breaking down this corruption of this story because he's been taught to deify that as though that is a real story. And it's time for us to break the gravitational pull of white supremacy and start to deal with the spiritual stories and deal with the original story and not the corruption of the story that we got from the Western world. When we look at many of these patriarchal stories, when we look at Abraham and so forth, many of the stories about whether it be Abraham and many of the others were literally copied spiritual stories of the Nile Valley. Circumcision did not start with him. Let's go to Ankh-Mahor. Let's go to the tomb and see where circumcision was already done by African people thousands of years ago. Now, Judaism, when you look at it, is predicated on the patriarchs. When we look at Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses. Now, when you start to knock those stories down and see where those stories came from, it has nothing to stand on. Without Judaism, there would not be a Christianity, nor would there be an Islam. They're all predicated based off of what Judaism laid down. So the question is, what we have to deal with, where did Judaism get it from? It did not start with that time period. It came from an earlier time period of African people's creation story, and these are some of the things that we're going to look at. You mentioned Exodus. This is another thing that yearly and annually that we get on television with Cecil B. DeMille's movies and so forth. There are no stories that the Egyptians enslaved some Jews, for 400 years. Those stories do not exist. But there is a story that during the time of the Hyksos invasion, who enslaved the Kemetic Africans, somebody turned the story against African people. And Neb-Petty-Ra-Admos I, now I know that name is unfamiliar to a lot of people, but Neb-Petty-Ra-Admos I, this is not a mystical person, this is a real person who expelled the Hyksos out of Egypt during this time. That's the only historical documentation that we got of a large group of people being expelled when Neb-Petty-Ra-Admos expelled the Hyksos. Now, a European named Sigmund Freud said that actually they took from Admos, Neb-Petty-Ra-Admos, and made this Moses, that this is somebody that they actually created. Now, many people, because of our belief system, because of our religious indoctrination, this is all we have known, and many people get up in arms. But it's time for us to put this in a mental court of law and start to look at what our ancestors wrote for countless thousands of years. And then, of course, we see that the one that's been most vilified and demonized in the African Nile Valley is Ursa Ma'at Ra Septepen Rabba Meso Murray Amen, commonly known as Ramses II. Now, I know many people haven't heard that original throne name, but that's his name, Ursa Ma'at Ra Septepen Rabba Meso Murray Amen. But there's no documentation, again, of anybody, of a group of people being expelled or a Red Sea flooding out the Pharaoh's army. Now, annually, every year, I take our groups to the Temple of a Million Years. The Temple of the Million Years was built by this great sultan or king named Ursa Ma'at Ra Septepen Rabba Meso Murray Amen, and there you see him flooding out the Hittite forces in the Orontes Sea. You see their chariots upside down, the men are flooded. Somebody came and copied these stories from these pylons, from these books in stone, and turned it into an Exodus story, which has no foundation, and even some European Ashkenazi Jews are saying or questioning many of these biblical stories now that these temples have been dug out of the sand. They were not dug out to tell the truth. They were only dug out to make tourist dollars. So that's what we tried to do, and in the presentation I will be bringing a wealth of information, not for people to believe in what I'm saying, but to think about what I'm saying. And not only what I'm saying, but what I'm showing with 31 years of research in the African Nile Valley.
Woo! Excellent. Now, when he's talking about doing his presentation, y'all, I just got to let you know what he's talking about, not to be redundant, but this will be Sunday, October 16, 2011. The proof is written on our ancient stones and papyrus. The African spirituality in the origin of the Bible and cultural destruction of African fashion, as we just heard from the sister. Doors open at 2 p.m. The event's at 3:30. Love gift offering of $20 before 4 p.m. with the flyer. All right? Y'all can pay in advance. $15. Call 347-496-1022. Also, he's giving away free tickets. All you got to do is call 347-215-6592. Hit me up. Brother Kwesi, can you take a call?
Sure.
All right, so this is Brother Corey. He has a question for you. You're on the air, Brother Corey.
Okay. Hello, how y'all doing, everybody?
Hello, Hotel.
Hey. How you doing? This is Corey from Dallas. Miss Kwesi.
Down here in my territory, down where I'm at, huh?
Hey, you know, we in the same belly of the beast. You know, this is Corey that used to hang out with you at not hang out, you know, swap knowledge at Keys Park.
Keys Park, yes, sir. Yeah, I'd go over there, jog over there, uh-huh.
Yeah, do you remember me?
Brother, we remember each other, right?
Right.
Okay, that's all that matters, that we remember each other.
Yeah, because, you know, I was on Facebook, and I saw that you and your wife...
I think due to the airways, my brother, I think it's only fair to ask a question so other people can get in, or we can go on and just be a personal phone call between you and I.
Okay, that's fine, because I was just trying to find a way to get back in touch with you. That's what I want, the question that I wanted to ask.
Okay, well, I'll give you my phone number.
Okay. What is
214-3